Shall I start with the last one? I agree with what you're saying. There is a tension with the fact that we've been given tools to circumvent the mainstream media with social media, but those social media platforms are owned by big tech oligarchs, so they can pull the plug at any time. But my perspective is, look, that's what we've got, so we have to use it. There's no way, if someone came along with something better, fine, let's go to that. It's less risky, but we don't have that now. And yes, there's censorship on Instagram and blah, 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 blah. But for example, we did a video probably like 6 months ago about Zionism for Palestine Deep Dive. Very critical, but just went through the history of it, explained it. It's something you would never ever see in mainstream media. And that got 1.5 million views on Instagram, which is more than most newspapers sell. So we can, that's exciting. And it goes to actually a lot of what I've heard today, which is people feel helpless, which of course I do as well, because we can't stop it. But we have to understand that we have had an impact. The last year of activism, the last year of speaking in the media, the last year of all the stuff that we've all been doing has had a massive impact. It's hard to quantify it. That's why people can't see it in some ways, because it's not something that changes overnight. But all these actions, every small action, every conversation you've had has had an impact. And if you look at the polling, despite a media which is basically just regurgitating Israeli propaganda 24/7, a majority of the population support a ceasefire, a majority of the population support an arms embargo, and that's because of us. That's because of us. Yeah. So it's important that we carry on, and it's important we take the wins that we have done. Like for that 1.5 million views on Zionism, Zionism, like the Israel lobby, was a red line topic. You couldn't mention it before, and people are talking much more openly about Zionism. That's merely because we are talking more stridently. We're taking advantage of this window. People, the genocide has opened up, and we need to keep doing that. And I think in the long term, we will see the benefits of that. Obviously, in the short term, we need to stop the genocide as soon as possible. To go on to, so the unions one is an important one. NUJ, I don't know too much about the NUJ. I've been a member for years. They don't seem to be that strident on these issues when they should be. That's my take. They should. They released a statement about ASA, I saw that, but that was mealy-mouthed in my opinion. We're talking about, this is a major, major escalation of state repression of journalists. This should be an outrage. There should be conferences, there should be press conferences, none of that. So they need to get their act together. The other thing is, I think that the unions are part of the whole system, unfortunately. They give millions of pounds to the Labour Party every year, which means they're giving millions of pounds to the genocide, because the Labour Party is the party that is participating in a genocide. So if our unions actually stepped up to where they should be, they should say, well, we're going to stop all funding for the Labour Party until they stop participating in that. Why haven't they done that? I don't want to hear another union person tell me how much they support Palestine when they're financing the party that is participating in it. So these are things that should have happened a long time ago. And this is what I'm saying about genocide is a red line. If we don't enforce that red line, we lose our humanity. So we're having a very clarifying process, I think, with all this. And the unions haven't stepped up to where they should. On the there's a lot to go. Anti-Semitism, anti-Israel. I mean, I think we've talked about that. Yeah, it's anti-Semitic. It's ridiculous. It encourages anti-Semitism. It's very dangerous for Jewish people, but they don't care. The Zionist lobby don't care, because it's a powerful deterrent to put in place to stop people speaking out for Palestine, which is all they care about. Yeah. The other thing is they co-opted many Jewish communal groups, which should be representing the Jewish community, not representing the state of Israel. But if you look, and this is partly how the Israel lobby operates and is quite clever, well, it's not clever, but it works to stop people speaking out against it, is instead of putting Israel in the title of an Israel lobby group, they'll put Jewish, so people are less inclined to criticise it. Like the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is an Israel lobby group. They've said that themselves, and if you look at records of, they go in to meet with the government and lobby for Israel. So they're not representing British Jews, they're representing Israel in Britain. So we need to talk openly about that. The other thing I think is very, very important about this whole debate is, and it's not talked about enough, is we need to promote Palestinian voices. That is over everyone. And it doesn't happen enough. I did a panel with Palestine Deep Dive, and Palestine Deep Dive, if people don't know, they should check it out. It's an organisation which started recently, well, a couple of years ago, but its whole philosophy is that they will promote Palestinian voices because they're lost in all this. And even we did a panel where I had...
And murdered.
Huh?
And murdered.
And murdered, of course, the journalists. Yeah, but I'm talking about in this country. But we did a Palestine deep dive event with four at the Frontline Club like about a year ago now, and we had 4 people from Gaza speaking. And people came up. I was the chair. I didn't do much speaking, but people came up to me after and said, "I've never seen that. I've never been to an event where you've just had 4 Palestinians speaking unapologetically about their experience and their views. They always have to be put with someone else. They always have to say, before they even allowed to speak, they have to say, well, I'm not anti-Semitic, I don't support Hamas. Like, there's all these ways that they're dehumanized, and mainly because of the Israel lobby. And we're talking about years of dehumanization, decades. So we need to unapologetically just put Palestinian voices forward above all of us. And it doesn't happen enough. I think that will change today. That will really change today. It needs to happen. Reasons for leaving declassified. There's no scandal. I'm tired, mainly. It's been well, for everyone, it's been a painful year, and it's hard to keep going amidst it all. So I'm definitely not out the game of investigative journalism at all. But I want to take a little break, and I won't keep speaking out about Palestine. Part of the reason I felt like this a while back, but I wanted to carry on because of the stories we were doing, and I will continue to do stories. But yeah, that's basically it. There's no scandal. Demonstration. Okay, or maybe I'll just finish with this then. Demonstrations. Yes, I mean, it goes back to my original point. We have had an impact. The demonstrations, like you were saying, have had a huge impact. Even if the mainstream media is lying about them, people are seeing people out on the streets, even if it's not covered in the media, and they're seeing encampments, and this had a massive effect. And it is so true that they want us to be isolated, like Chris was saying. And then when I felt isolated or helpless over the past year, and then seen a Palestinian flag or something, which are everywhere, like, it gives you a sort of like, okay, well, maybe we're part of something much bigger. We're the majority here, so it's important to keep coming out, like the other lady was saying, keep doing these meetings, keep talking. And we're winning, I think, in terms of that. One more thing. Splitting the mainstream media. That's an interesting, very interesting point. The FT has always been actually quite good on Israel-Palestine, partly because it trusts its audience, because it's not right. They know that and also its audience needs to have less ideology and more facts because they're investing based on the information. But I think with Trump, what you're going to see is the liberal establishment, which has been part of the genocide, obviously, with Biden and Harris, but their followers haven't spoken out against it because their leaders have been doing the genocide. Under Trump, it might change. It might be like these party hacks that just basically follow the party line. When it's Trump doing it, boogeyman Trump, then they might say, they might come out against it more. And I do think that does hold some hope that the liberal establishment, which has been completely behind the genocide because Biden has been in the White House, they might move into a critical position. If you look at what happened under Starmer in this country, the liberal establishment's just shut up really about it because their guys in number 10. So you might see that change, but I don't hold out too much hope for a split in the mainstream media. We're talking about forces that are really powerful, and to go against them, you need some kind of organisation within the media, and I don't see that happening. Most people agree with Peter; they don't see themselves as monsters at all. But there's a lot of careerists, and there's a lot of people who go with the flow because they don't want to rock the boat because they have a career to keep in mind.
Guys, but the question about Al Jazeera, Al Jazeera has really been the place to go of choice, the mainstream channel of choice, and it reminds me, it's had some bad patches, Al Jazeera, but I remember when its building in Baghdad was bombed in 2003. It was if you wanted to understand what was happening in Iraq, you had to go to Al Jazeera, and now you have to go to Al Jazeera again. And we have to honour in this room, since we're talking about the media, all those incredibly brave journalists, Palestinian journalists. Many of my colleagues in Middle East Eye are in Gaza and the West Bank, the sacrifices. I mean, they are making the ultimate sacrifice, and that includes Al Jazeera. So I really feel that too much praise is not enough for that channel over Gaza. It's very interesting. A discussion that raised about the mainstream media. Basically, it has split between, I agree with this, between two categories. To talk about media studies language for a little bit, Noam Chomsky's analysis set out in Manufacturing Consent when he saw a mass media which was capitalist but directed by government. And he set out all the mechanisms by which the media was controlled. That scarcely exists anymore. In the last few years, Chomsky's been outdated. We've had the emergence of a new oligarch media. Musk buying Twitter was a case in point. Murdoch is quite clearly an oligarch media. The Telegraph, the Associated, these are offshore, in terms of British terms, offshore billionaires. They have really no interest in our country except to maximise profits. They've lost any connection, any organic correct connection with British viewers. But on the other hand, we do have the corporate media, some survivals of the corporate media, one of the most eminent of which is the Financial Times, whose editor is Lebanese. And I don't know whether that's why that coverage has become so much better than their rivals, but it is certainly, they did a stunning piece, dig it out, about the ethnic cleansing in the South Hebron Hills a few weeks ago. Just stunning, amazing piece of investigative, really superb investigative journalism. Likewise, I mean, there's been, Channel 4 has done one or two phenomenal things. I was on the borders of Gaza a few weeks ago, and I watched when there was this settlement conference. Grotesque business. I mean, quite extraordinary when the settlers were meeting senior politicians from Likud to discuss the settlement of Gaza, it was on army territory. There was artillery rounds being fired just quite close to us into Gaza. You could see the smoke from Jabalia. And yet there was this conference about how to parcel up Gaza after the Palestinians had been kicked out. And I watched Pádraig Flynn, I think Pádraig O'Brien, I think he was called. I just watched him, and I watched the report he did afterwards. Absolutely sublime piece of journalism in which he really tackled ministers and showed what was going on. And so it isn't all lost. I just want to, but I do think that just like the political parties, Labour, mainstream Labour Party and Tories, they turned their back on the British people. You saw that in the last election, the votes. And the newspapers have too. And I was very attracted by that question about the connection with the climate change movement. Now, what you have here is two parties which are squeezing themselves further and further to the right, in some ways to the far right, and leaving huge space, on the left, the traditional Labour Party, I would say, traditional Tories like myself, the Green Party, those four independents who are just ignored. You notice the way they just don't get on the papers. Even though Gaza was that issue, they're smeared as sectarians. John Ashworth, who got defeated in Leicester, is on the telly all the time. Whereas Shaukat Adam, who beats him, never gets on at all. It's absolutely disgusting, this, and that is. But I think what you can see there is a new political movement potentially able to emerge, since the Labour Party, for fascinating historic reasons, has turned its back on its origins and what it ever stood for. It's quite fascinating, and I hope that is. I think there are the seeds of something very profound indeed for the future. Thank you very much for allowing me to be up to I had to question everything. That dossier of Blair and the intelligence services, and then the war on terror which followed it, and the fact that the British state was involved in torture. It just caused me to have to reconsider who I was and what I did. Not long after that, Grace, I started to turn up on Stop the War. Well, sorry.
We're polite, don't worry.
I started to turn up on Stop the War platforms, actually. So that was what set me on my journey, really. And it was when I realised. I even give a plug to Media Lens. I don't know if you know them, but they're a sort of small. They are present on Twitter and elsewhere, and they used to send you, well, as a journalist, emails saying, just pointing out you were wrong. And I used to respond to them. I mean, I read these and I thought, gosh, they're right, aren't they? Even though most journalists just, I think, ignored this correspondence, but it kept me honest, or made me get honest, and made me realise that I'd been very naive particularly about Western foreign policy. Although I did feel, and I still disagree, but I did disagree with Stop the War about the Soviet Union. I felt that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I felt quite tolerant of British foreign policy. It was the war on terror which followed it, which just. There's lots of other. JBL does great. Keep it up. I mean, because your analysis. You sent my regards to Jenny Manson, who's become a great friend of mine. Your analysis is just valuable. It's the fact you keep on writing letters. I draw on your research, and don't, for heaven's sake. And also your reminder that there is not a monolithic collection of British Jews. Sometimes created that idea, and it just isn't. It's a great insult to the British Jewish community, that, and in fact it's abusive in my view. And I think one of the things the Jewish Chronicle ought to do is to reflect the plurality of Jewish opinion. I speak as an outsider. In a way it doesn't do enough of, and you're a reminder of that. And then what was that? Sorry, I apologise. I'll have a look for what the other questions were, Matt.
Yeah, I'll start with the first one, which was how do you inform people? How much do people know? I mean, it's complicated because I also agree with the lady at the back that people do know a lot. And it's also true what she was saying about feeling isolated. I felt very isolated at times over the past year. But then I go out and I'll go to these encampments and then I'll talk to people and I'll be like, actually, we're the majority here. But the way the media presents it is that we're like this fringe dissident element, which is not true. They're the minority. People in power, the sycophantic journalists, the political class are in a minority, which is why there's this repression. So, but to go to your question of how do you inform people, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I've thought about this a lot. My take is we should forget about the mainstream media. It's unreformable in my opinion, and Peter might disagree with me about this, I don't know, but that's something I've come to lately, because I feel like in the system we live in, which we're told is a democracy, but is effectively an oligarchy with some limited democratic elements, that the role of the media within that system is to be an adjunct to power, and has always been. And there were some different, like The Guardian for a while, it wasn't perfect, but I'm talking like 15 years ago maybe. You could get some dissident opinion in there, and you could get good investigations. They had good investigative journalists, but that's disappeared completely. So with them gone, there's nothing. And I don't think we should be striving to try and change them, because they won't change, because their role in our society is to be a part of a propaganda system, not a media system. So what we can do is social media, but also support independent media. Like, if you look at what Peter, as he said, was in establishment media for a long, long time and has gone out, but there is a whole ecosystem where Peter can write now, and that didn't exist 20 years ago. There is some hope. This country, for so long, was one of the most bleak places on many levels, politically, media-wise, but now we have one of the most exciting alternative media ecosystems in the world. If you, Peter mentioned Richard Sanders' recent piece for Double Down News. That's got 500,000 views on YouTube. Double Down News didn't exist 10 years ago, and there's plenty of others. There's Canary, there's Electronic Intifada, there's Novara, there's Declassified, there's Middle East Eye. There's a lot of places now. So I think what we should do, as people who are interested in, not in dissent, in truthful journalism, which isn't tainted by state and corporate power, we should work on building that up and actually make sure that there's an media infrastructure in place to take on establishment media if we ever get another chance for transformative change like there was under Jeremy Corbyn. He was a lone figure. A lot of this media actually developed under in that time because there was a space for it to develop. But part of the it wasn't mature enough to support or to push back against the mainstream lies. But if we ever get that chance again, we need to have that infrastructure in place. So I think our goal should be in the long term to build that alternative media space. There's so many now. Palestine Deep Dive. It's really exciting. So that's what I want to dedicate my life as a journalist to. And it's great that Peter can get his word out now outside the mainstream. I actually think probably has a bigger impact than he would writing a column for a newspaper which is read by the Prime Minister. In terms of the I mean, it's still, and that moves me on to the second question about journey to the dark side, because as Pete said, I did work for the Financial Times for a number of years, and it was exhilarating to write articles. That I was based in Washington for a while, and we knew that articles would be read by the president. It was President Obama at that point. But after a while, you realise, well, I can get my articles read by the president because I can't say certain things. That's how the system works. Yeah. So you either stay in it and accede to the fact that you're not going to be able to speak the truth or certain truths, or you say, well, that's not why I wanted to be a journalist. I'm going to have a much smaller audience, but actually be able to have freedom of thought and freedom of journalism, effectively. So that's why I think that we should focus on that. In terms of the JBL stuff, yeah, I mean, it's this is why I did an event with Asa Winstanley last year about his book called Weaponizing Anti-Semitism. And I think that the important thing we should push for is that the Zionist lobby and the pro-Israel lobby groups are the ones who are promoting anti-Semitism, because they are the ones conflating Zionism, Israel with all Jews, which is an anti-Semitic idea. So we need to flip it on its head, and I think that Asa's attacked as anti-Semitic for that book, but actually his book is part of the fight against anti-Semitism. Because if you weaponize anti-Semitism to destroy pro-Palestine activism, to destroy any kind of solidarity of Palestine, you cheapen the term. You make people not switch off when they hear it, which happens a lot now, unfortunately. But that's the result of the Zionist lobby. They don't care about it. They weaponize it all the time. They used it in Amsterdam. They started calling it a pogrom, you know. It's really, really, really dangerous. So we need to flip it and make them the ones who are promoting anti-Semitism, not us who are just speaking out. So and obviously a larger percentage of Jewish people were kicked out of Labour during the fake anti-Semitism crisis, and that was never talked about in the mainstream. So we need to flip the whole thing's Orwellian, really, the whole debate. Give up mainstream media. Should we give up? Yeah, give up mainstream media. It's an easy one. Jewish Chronicle is awful. Yeah, it's the worst paper probably in the country. It's unbelievable, the lies. They were some of they destroyed a lot of people during the Corbyn years. I remember when that talk I did with Asa was up in Liverpool, and we were talking to a lot of the women who had organised for Corbyn at that time, and there were so many of them saying like, oh yeah, they were quite naive politically. They were like, we got involved because of Corbyn, and then they suddenly found themselves on the front page of a newspaper being called anti-Semitic, and it was really scary and actually destroyed a lot of their life for a long time. So, I mean, I have nothing good to say about that newspaper. The funny thing was, I don't know if everyone saw recently, there was this scandal where this guy called Elon Perry, although that's probably not his real name, he was publishing articles based on security sources which were talking about Gaza and the Philadelphia corridor, but they chimed with Netanyahu talking points, and then it came out that it was probably a Netanyahu op. I actually interviewed him the month before that scandal happened, and it's on YouTube, he was insane. He was literally, it's worth watching because it's a window into the Zionist mind, and a genocidal mind. He couldn't accept any facts which contradicted his narrative, which was just that Israel, he said it's things like Israel doesn't target civilians, no civilians have died on purpose, just outrageous stuff. But he was welcomed into the Jewish Chronicle, and it's become it's a joke newspaper. It's not a newspaper, it's just a propaganda outlet for Israel, effectively. So again, the reason it still has so much sway is it has got mainstream media access in terms of its columnists. You know, like Jonathan Freedom was until recently a columnist, and he's a senior columnist at The Guardian, and there's plenty of others. So, but again, it goes back to what I was saying. We should ignore these outlets because we can't change them. What we can do is build up an infrastructure to take on their lies, and that's happening. And actually, if you look at it, for example, someone was talking to me the other day, someone very close to me who was going to be targeted by them or was approached by them for a smear piece. And I said, look, you've got about 50,000 more followers in the Jewish Chronicle on Twitter. Like they're a paper tiger. They act powerful, and people are scared by them. But actually, what they do is unjustifiable, and not many people read it. So don't worry about them. And I'll finish with this just on the Israel lobby itself. Again, before this genocide, people didn't want to talk about it because there were many deterrents in place to not speak about it, particularly getting smeared as anti-Semitic. But that has now changed, and you can talk about the Israel lobby openly now, which is very, very important, because I think Peter's done an extremely important documentary about the Israel lobby. But we've done a lot of work at Declassified, and you realise when you start looking into it that a lot of the complicity in the media and the political system is because of that lobby. It's not because it serves a geopolitical function, which it also does, Israel. But a lot of it is, there's a massive infrastructure of just destroying anyone who might step on the toes of Israel. The perfect example being Jeremy Corbyn. So another strategy we have to do is speak open-chested about the role that the Israel lobby plays in this country. It's not anti-Semitic. Most foreign countries have lobbies in this country of differing powers. The Israel one happens to be particularly powerful, and we should talk about it, we should investigate it, and we should expose it. And they know what they're doing is unjustifiable. We actually launched a campaign about Labour Friends of Israel at Declassified, and we were expecting some pushback. We got none, because they know it's unjustifiable. It's unjustifiable to have an organisation taking MPs to Israel on propaganda tours and not revealing their funders. That's just outrageous. Most people on the right, left, centre, if they're told that, are like, well, I don't want my politicians being taken on jollies by an organisation we don't know who funds them. We can guess who funds them. So all this has changed, as I said initially. There's an opening now. I really feel there's an opening, and we need to use that opening to change the terms of debate, to move the Overton window, which I think has happened.